The meeting had been going on for 2 hours and nobody in the room cared very much. The Galactic Council met every few weeks inside Veyron Station, a wide silver structure that floated between 3-star systems, and most of the sessions were about trade numbers and border rules that nobody wanted to break anyway. High Arbiter Jin sat at the head of the long curved table and listened to a representative from the Keth Directorate explain, for the third time, why their shipping lanes should be expanded. She had heard this argument before. She would hear it again. It was Director Orith himself who was speaking. He was tall and angular, with pale gray skin and eyes the color of old copper. He spoke in the careful, slow way that powerful people speak when they know everyone in the room must listen. Jin watched him and kept her face still. Around the table sat representatives from 11 other species, the Velhari, the Orin, the Drenni, the Solari Pact, and more. All of them had sent their best people. All of them looked faintly bored. Then the alarm started. It was not a loud alarm. Veyron Station had been designed by engineers who believed that panic was more dangerous than any threat, so the warning system produced a low, steady tone, the kind of sound that made people stop talking and look up rather than run for the doors. Jin looked up. So did everyone else. The station's senior monitor, a young Velhari woman named Tass, appeared on the main screen at the far end of the chamber. She looked like she was trying very hard to appear calm. She was not quite managing it. "High Arbiter," Tass said, "we are reading spatial distortions. Multiple locations. Sectors 7, 12, and 19. All 3 at the same time." Jin stood up slowly. "How many distortions?" "We are still counting. The sensors are having difficulty." Tass paused. "High Arbiter, I think you should see this directly." The main screen shifted. What it showed made the room go quiet in a way that had nothing to do with boredom. The distortions were not small. They were not the kind of spatial event that a passing ship might cause, or even a gravity anomaly near a dense star. These were tiers, dark openings in the fabric of visible space, wide and perfectly circular, and from each one came ships. Big ships. Black ships. Ships that did not reflect light the way normal ships did but instead seemed to eat it, pulling the surrounding brightness into themselves and giving nothing back. One ship came through the first distortion. Then 3 more. Then a dozen. By the time the count reached 30, Jin had stopped blinking. 43, Tass said quietly. 43 vessels confirmed. Possibly more still in transit. We cannot identify the hull design. We cannot identify the drive signature. We cannot identify, she stopped. High Arbiter, our instruments have no record of these ships anywhere in the database. Director Orith was already on his feet. Scramble the defense fleet, he said, and his voice had gone very flat and very hard. Now. All available ships to intercept coordinates. Jin raised one hand. Wait. Arbiter, those are unidentified vessels of unknown capability massing at our border. I said wait. Her voice was quiet. It was the kind of quiet that ended arguments. Orith sat back down, though he did not look happy about it. She watched the screen. The black ships were not moving forward. They had come through their dark doorways and stopped, spreading into a wide formation that covered an enormous stretch of space but made no aggressive move. No weapons had powered up, or at least, none that the station's sensors could detect. They simply waited, massive and dark and still, like something that had all the time in the universe. The defense fleet scrambled anyway. 27 Council warships moved into position between the station and the unknown vessels. It took 11 minutes. When they arrived and spread into formation, Jin watched the distance close on the screen. Then the Council ship stopped. Not stopped in the way ships stop when their captains give orders. Stopped in the way a machine stops when someone pulls the power from it. Every ship in the defense fleet went dark at the same moment, no weapons, no engines, no communications. 27 vessels drifting silent in space, and not a single one of them had been touched. The chamber was perfectly still. Jin counted to 5 in her head. Then the communication board lit up. Not the Council's own frequency. Not any frequency in the known directory. A signal was coming in on a band that had not been used in 300 years, and when the station's computer finally matched it to a record in the deep archives, the notation next to it read, Human Standard Broadcast. She heard someone at the table make a small sound. She did not look to see who it was. Open it, she said. The voice that came through was a woman's voice. It was steady and clear, with the particular kind of calm that comes not from ease but from long practice. It spoke first in High Velhari, then shifted through 11 other languages without pause, as if all of them were equally natural. This is Admiral Nora Vance of the Terran Renewal Fleet. We are transmitting on all registered Council frequencies as well as archived human broadcast bands. We are aware that our arrival has caused concern. We want to be clear, we are not here to cause harm. We are here because this is our galaxy too, and we have been away for a long time. We would like to talk. The message ended. The room stayed silent. Orith found his voice first. It is a trick. A deception. Some species using a dead archive to mask. It is not a trick. The voice on the channel had not switched off. The woman, Vance, had heard him. Director Orith of the Keth Directorate. We know who is in that room. We have been listening to your open communications for the past 14 months while we decided how to approach. We apologize for the disruption to your defense fleet. They will have power restored in approximately 4 minutes. We did not damage anything. 4 minutes and 20 seconds later, every Council ship in the defense line powered back on. Jean looked at the screen for a long time. 43 black ships that should not exist, built by a people the galaxy had written off as gone. 300 years of silence, and now this, a calm voice and a fleet that could switch off an entire defense line the way a person switches off a light. She thought about all the times the Council had voted against sending search parties. All the times the argument had been made that humanity was gone, that resources were better spent elsewhere, that some questions did not need answers. She thought about those votes for exactly 3 seconds. Then she pushed the thought away, because there was work to do. Open a response channel, she said. Wideband. Everything we have. The channel opened. On the screen, a face appeared, a human face, younger than Jean had expected, with dark eyes and a straight, patient expression. She was in a uniform the color of deep water, and she sat with the easy stillness of someone who had been waiting a long time and had made peace with the waiting. Admiral Vance, Jean said. I am High Arbiter Jean of the Galactic Council. Welcome back. The human woman looked at her for a moment. Something moved behind her eyes, something Jean could not quite read. Thank you, High Arbiter, Vance said. It is good to be seen again. They gave the humans a meeting room on the neutral level of Veyron Station. It was a plain room with gray walls and a long table, and when Admiral Nora Vance walked in with her 4 people behind her, the 12 Council representatives who were already seated watched them in the kind of silence that tries very hard to look like calm. Vance sat down. Her people sat down with her. 2 of them were in uniform like she was. One was a tall man in a gray coat with a tablet under his arm, who looked at the room around him the way a person looks at a museum, curious, careful, taking notes in his head. The last was a young woman, narrow-shouldered and serious, who kept her eyes on the table. High Arbiter Jean opened the session. She introduced the Council members in the room and asked Vance to introduce her team. Vance gestured to the tall man first. Dr. Callum Price. He leads our scientific division. He built the drives on our fleet. She gestured to the young woman. Lieutenant Sarah Holt, tactical officer on my ship. And these 2 are my senior aides. She did not name the aides. Nobody asked. Counselor Lissaven of the Orin Collective leaned forward slightly. She was smaller than most of the people in the room, with wide pale eyes and a voice that was always just a little too careful, like someone who had learned early that the wrong word at the wrong moment could cost something important. Admiral, before we begin formal proceedings, may I ask something personally? Go ahead, Vance said. Where have you been? The room was quiet. It was the question all of them wanted to ask, and Lissaven had simply decided to ask it. Vance looked at her for a moment. Then she said, home. We have been home. She paused. But home got very difficult for a while. What followed was not exactly a speech. Vance spoke in short, plain sentences, and she let Price fill in the details with his tablet when the numbers got complicated. The council listened. Some of them had their own aides taking notes. Director Orith, who sat at the far end of the table with his arms crossed, listened too, though his face gave nothing away. The story came out piece by piece. 300 years ago, humanity had been spread across dozens of systems, noisy, fast-moving, always building something, always arguing about something, always pushing further than anyone thought they should. Then the inside of human civilization began to tear. There was no single cause that Price or Vance pointed to. It was many things at once: political collapse in the core systems, resource failures in the outer colonies, old arguments that had been building for generations finally breaking open all at the same time. Within 40 years of the last known contact with the Council, most of human space had gone silent. Not because humans were gone, but because the infrastructure that connected them had fallen apart. Ships stopped running regular routes. Communication relays went dark. Whole colonies lost contact with each other, let alone with the broader galaxy. "We sent signals," Vance said, and her voice stayed flat and steady when she said it. "A lot of signals. Not just to each other. To the Council. To individual member species. We sent signals asking for trade. For medical supplies. For anything." She paused. The signals were received. The room got very quiet. "We know they were received," she continued, "because we have logs of the responses. Most of the responses were automated. Some were not. The ones that were not automated said various things. Most of them said that the Council was not in a position to intervene in internal human affairs. Several said that any aid would be conditional on political restructuring that was not possible at the time." She looked at Jun. One said that humanity's situation was regrettable and that the Council would revisit the matter at its next session. Jun did not look away. She did not offer anything. She simply held Vance's gaze. "The next session was 3 years later," Vance said. "By that point, we had stopped sending signals." Price set his tablet on the table and turned it so the room could see the screen. He showed population figures. Where humanity had numbered 30 billion people across dozens of star systems at the height of its reach, 250 years of isolation had brought that number down to 11 billion, concentrated in 4 systems. The numbers were clear and simple on the screen. Nobody in the room said anything about them for a long moment. Then Orith spoke. "This is a compelling story," he said, and his voice was as smooth as polished metal. "But stories can be shaped. Documents can be constructed. We have no way to independently verify." "You will," Vance said. She did not raise her voice. "We brought everything. Full archive access. 100 years of public and governmental records. You can send your own researchers into our databases and check every figure individually if you want. It will take a long time, but we have time." Orith looked at her. Something moved behind his copper eyes, but he did not speak again. Lysaven cleared her throat. "Dr. Price," she said carefully, "your fleet, the ships that arrived, our scientists have been analyzing them since yesterday. They cannot explain the drive system. The energy signatures are inconsistent with anything we understand. Could you tell us how they work?" Price looked up from his tablet as if he had been waiting for someone to ask. He explained it the way he explained most things, simply, without trying to impress anyone, the way someone talks about a problem they spent a long time solving. "Dark matter," he said, "could be manipulated under the right conditions to create localized distortions in space itself. Not tunnels. Not conventional faster-than-light travel. Something different, folding the space between 2 points so that the distance between them briefly ceased to exist." He pulled up a diagram on the shared screen. The Council's science advisors, who had been sitting quietly at a side table, leaned forward. One of them made a small sound. Price kept talking. He explained the early tests, the failures, the 17 ships they had lost before the drive worked reliably. He mentioned the energy requirements in numbers that made one of the science advisors stand up abruptly, excuse herself, and walk quickly out of the room. Price watched her go and then looked back at his diagram as if nothing unusual had happened. "You did this alone," said the science advisor who had stayed. It was not quite a question. "We did not have much choice," Price said. The session broke for a pause in the middle of the afternoon. People stepped out into the corridor, spoke quietly, tried to process what they had heard. Commander Leon Graves, who had not been in the meeting room, he had stayed aboard the Inevitable Dawn, sent Vance a short message asking how it was going. She sent back 2 words, as expected. Lysaven found Vance standing alone near the corridor window, looking out at the stars. She approached carefully, the way you approach something you are not sure will welcome you. Admiral, she said quietly. I want you to know, I argued against closing the search. When the council voted to stop looking. I was very junior then and my argument did not carry. But I argued. Vance looked at her. I know, she said. We found the records of that vote too. Lysaven was quiet for a moment. Are you here for peace, or for an accounting? The question landed in the air between them. Vance turned back to the window and looked at the stars for a few seconds before she answered. We are here for both, she said, if the council is willing to provide both. 3 weeks after the first meeting, the sessions had become almost routine. The council representatives arrived in the morning, the humans arrived a few minutes later, and for several hours they talked about logistics, histories, and the long slow work of figuring out what came next. It was careful and tiring and necessary, and most of it was not exciting at all. What was not routine was the effect the humans had simply by being present. It started small. A Keth technician had been assigned to show the human delegation around the station's engineering level, a courtesy visit, nothing sensitive. Commander Leon Graves had gone along. He walked through the corridors of Veyron Station's lower decks with his hands behind his back and his eyes on everything. The Keth technician gave the standard tour and explained the station's power systems. Graves listened politely. When the technician finished, Graves asked 3 questions. The technician answered the first 2 without difficulty. The third question made him stop and think for a long time before admitting he did not know the answer. Graves did not make anything of it. He thanked the technician and moved on. But the technician went back to his supervisor afterward and said, with a slightly shaken expression, that the human had asked something that he was going to need to take to the senior engineers. It was like that in every room the humans walked into. They were polite. They were unhurried. They did not brag or push or demand. They just looked at things with the particular kind of attention that comes from people who have spent a very long time solving problems with very limited resources, and everywhere they looked, they seemed to be quietly noticing things. The Council's science advisors arranged a formal exchange, 3 days of shared technical presentations, the Council showing what they had, the humans showing what they had. On the first day, the Council presented their fastest conventional drive system, which was genuinely impressive. The human scientists listened, asked good questions, and said politely that it was very elegant work. On the second day, Price presented the dark matter drive again, this time in more technical detail. By the end of the first hour, 2 of the Council's senior physicists had stopped taking notes and were simply staring. By the end of the second hour, a third had quietly closed her notebook and was looking at the ceiling. After the session ended, Graves found Price in the corridor and asked him how it had gone. I think I upset some people, Price said, with the air of someone who has genuinely not intended this but is not entirely surprised by it. Good, Graves said. Meanwhile, Director Orith was busy. He had not come back to the main sessions after the second day. He sent a junior representative in his place and claimed pressing Keth business. What he was actually doing was sending messages, encrypted, routed through commercial relays to make them harder to trace, to 3 allied council species. The messages were careful and measured. He did not say, let us attack the humans. He said, the situation is unstable, and unstable situations require contingency planning, and prudent species prepare options in advance. The responses he got were cautious but not dismissive. The species he had contacted were frightened. They had done the same math everyone else had done, 43 ships of unknown capability, a drive system that should not exist, a people who had rebuilt from near extinction in complete isolation. Frightened species listened to arguments about contingency planning. Graves found out about the messages on the 5th day. He did not find out by accident. The Inevitable Dawn had been running passive signal analysis since the fleet arrived, quiet, background work, nothing that touched the station's own systems. When an unusual pattern appeared in the encrypted commercial traffic routed through Sector 9, the ship's intelligence officer flagged it. Graves read the flag and spent 3 hours tracing the pattern before he was confident enough to say what it was. He went to Vance. He explained what he had found and what he believed it meant. Vance listened without interrupting. When he was done, she was quiet for a moment. "How certain are you?" she asked. 85%, he said. "Maybe more. The encryption pattern is consistent with Keth diplomatic security protocols. The routing is designed to look like commercial traffic, but the timing intervals are not commercial. And the 3 destination nodes match the last known communication addresses for the species he would most want to contact." Vance thought about it. "We do not move on this yet," she said. "We let it develop. If we expose it now, it looks like we were surveilling their communications. If we wait until it becomes an action, it becomes undeniable." Graves nodded. He had expected this answer. He went back to the ship and told his intelligence officer to keep watching. On the 7th day, something happened that made Oritha's plan both more urgent and more obviously doomed. A Keth military vessel, not a council ship, a Keth national vessel, moved into the approach corridor that ran between the station and the outer edge of the human fleet's position. It was a slow move, deliberate, the kind of thing that could be explained as a navigation error if needed. It crossed the 2,000-kilometer line that the humans had quietly established as their perimeter. The human ships did nothing dramatic. Every Keth vessel within the approach corridor simply stopped. Not explosions. Not weapons fire. Not even a warning shot. The ships went dark the same way the Council's defense fleet had gone dark on the first day, all at once, completely, without violence. 22 minutes later, the Keth ships came back on. Waiting in the captain's queue on the lead vessel was a message from Commander Graves. It was 6 words: "We noticed. Please do not do that again." The council chamber heard about it within the hour. Lysaven came to find Vance immediately. She looked worried and something else, something that might have been relief. "You could have destroyed them," she said. "Yes," Vance said. "Why didn't you?" Vance looked at her steadily. "Because we did not need to. Because they were not trying to hurt us, they were trying to test us. And now they have their answer." Lieutenant Sarah Holt spent most of her free hours in the station's common areas, which was not where senior officers usually spent their time. She had started talking to a young Oran diplomat named Selloras, who was about her age and had the same habit of asking questions that other people thought were too simple to bother with. They had lunch together twice that week, which was already more social contact than most of the human delegation had managed with any council member. Selloras asked Holt what Earth was like. Holt thought about it seriously before answering. She said that Earth was complicated, still rebuilding in many places, still carrying the marks of what had happened. But there were forests coming back, she said. And cities that were clean and planned and built by people who had decided to do it right this time. She said it the way someone talks about something they love without needing to pretend it is perfect. Selloras listened carefully and then asked if Holt had been afraid, coming here. Holt laughed, a short, honest sound. "I was terrified," she said. "But the Admiral was not. So I watched her and tried to do what she did." "What did she do?" Holt thought about it. "She acted like she belonged here," she said. "Like it was already decided that we had a right to be in this room. And after a while, it started to feel that way." That evening, Jean sat alone in her office and looked at the latest reports. The sessions were progressing. The science exchange was producing results. The Keth incident had been contained without escalation. By the numbers, things were going well. She kept thinking about one thing Vance had said in the first session, quietly, almost as an aside: the signals were received. Jean had been part of the council for 30 years. She had voted on the search question twice, once to reduce resources, once to end it entirely. She had told herself both times that it was a practical decision. Resources were finite. Hope had to be weighed against evidence. She had told herself that for 300 years' worth of council decisions. She pulled up the archive. The vote records were there, as Vance had said they would be. Clean and clear and permanent. She looked at them for a long time, and then she closed the file, because there was work to do and looking at it longer was not going to change what it said. On the 12th day, Admiral Vance called a formal session. Not a working session, not a technical exchange, a formal one, with every council member present and the full record open. She sent the request the night before and gave a simple reason: humanity wished to present the Terran historical record. The chamber was full when she arrived. Species who had sent only junior representatives to the earlier sessions had sent their seniors today. Juan was at the head of the table. Lissaven was 2 seats to her left. Even Orith was there, back from wherever he had been going instead of the sessions, seated at the far end with the same carefully blank expression he always wore. Vance came in with Graves and Price and Holt behind her. She sat down, folded her hands on the table, and began. The Terran historical record was not a dramatic presentation. It did not have music or dramatic images or speeches designed to make people feel things. It was a document, a very large, very carefully organized document, and Vance walked through it the way a careful person walks through something important, slowly, in order, without skipping anything. She began with the date of the last official council human diplomatic contact. She moved forward from there. Every year of the collapse was in the record. Every failed communication attempt. Every request for aid that went unanswered. Every automated response that came back saying the matter would be reviewed. The dates and names and numbers were on the screen for everyone to see, and they stayed on the screen long enough for everyone to read them. The population figures appeared about 40 minutes into the presentation. 30 billion people at the start. The curve going down, sharply, then more slowly, then sharply again during what the record called the third collapse. The number at the bottom of the curve, 4 billion. Then the slow climb back up over 200 years of isolation. 11 billion now. Nobody spoke while the figures were on the screen. The room was the kind of quiet that has weight. Vance moved on without pausing. She did not linger on any single data point or let the silence sit long enough to become theatrical. She was not trying to make the council feel guilty. She was making sure they understood exactly what had happened, line by line, so that no one in the room could say later that they had not known. The last section of the formal presentation was a list of the council votes during the years of the silence. The votes to reduce search efforts. The votes to reallocate resources. The vote, carried by 9 members, opposed by 2, with 1 abstention, to formally end all search operations and remove humanity from the active diplomatic register. When that slide went up, Orith shifted in his seat. Vance looked at the room. "That is the record," she said. "All of it is open for independent verification. We have brought our full archive. You can check any figure, any date, any document individually. We have nothing to hide and we are not asking you to take our word for it." There was a pause. Then Orith leaned forward. "This is a very compelling presentation," he said. His voice was smooth and measured. "But I think the council should be cautious about accepting a one-sided account at face value. History is complicated. Humanity's situation during that period was, by any objective measure, the result of internal human. Every screen in the chamber changed. Not the presentation screen. Every personal screen, every aide's tablet, every device in the room connected to the station network. On all of them, the same thing appeared, a document. A long document with encrypted headers and routing codes, the kind that commercial relay traffic uses. Beside each message was a translation, a destination address, and a timestamp. Oritha's messages. All of them. Clean and complete. Graves was standing at the back of the room. He had not moved or said anything. He had simply transmitted the file to every screen in the chamber at the exact moment Orith began to speak. The room read in silence. It took about 2 minutes. Orith stayed very still. Lissaven was the first to speak. Her voice was very controlled. "Director Orith. These messages were sent from a Keth diplomatic account to 3 council member species. The most recent is dated 4 days ago. They discuss, in considerable detail, the possibility of coordinated military action against the human fleet." She paused. "Is this your account?" Orith looked at the screens. He looked at Graves. He looked at Vance. Then he said, carefully, that the messages were taken out of context. Nobody in the room said anything to that. The vote to censure Orith and suspend the Keth Directorate's council membership took less than 20 minutes. It was 9-2 in favor, with 1 abstention. Orith left the chamber without speaking. The junior Keth representative who stayed behind looked like she wanted to disappear. After a short break, the session resumed. June looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the time of day. "Admiral Vance," she said. "The Council has heard your record and acknowledged its contents. We understand that a formal response is required. I would like to ask you directly, what does humanity want from this process?" Vance had been waiting for this question. She answered it simply. "Reparations," she said. "Not symbolic ones. Real resources, medical technology, agricultural systems, infrastructure materials, things that can help the people still rebuilding. A formal acknowledgement, entered permanently into the Council record, that the silence happened and that the Council's inaction contributed to it. And a seat at this table. Not because we are asking for permission to exist in this galaxy. We exist here regardless. But because we intend to be part of what happens next, and it is better for everyone if that happens through this structure rather than around it." June looked at her for a long moment. "That is a short list," she said. "I expected more." "More would require anger," Vance said. "We are not angry. We are serious, which is different." In a side room off the main corridor, Sarah Holt sat with Celoras after the session ended. Celoras had been very quiet since the Orith documents appeared on the screens. Now she was quiet in a different way, the kind of quiet that is trying to find words. "I am sorry," she said finally. It came out simply, without ceremony. "For my people. For the Council. For all of it. I know that does not fix anything." Holt looked at her. She thought about the right thing to say. She thought about the number at the bottom of the population curve, 4 billion, at the lowest point, and about all the people that number represented. "Sorry is a beginning," she said. "Beginnings are what we are good at." That evening, alone in her quarters on the inevitable dawn, Vance pulled up an archived photograph of Earth from before the collapse. Not the current Earth, still marked and still rebuilding. The old Earth, green and blue and ordinary in the way that only things you love can be ordinary. She looked at it for a long time. Then she put it away. She had a response to draft to the Council's initial terms, and the draft needed to be ready before morning, and the work was not going to do itself. She opened her documents and started writing. The Treaty of Renewed Contact was signed on the 31st day. It was not signed with ceremony or speeches or the kind of event that gets recorded and replayed for generations, though it would be anyway. It was signed in the same plain meeting room where the sessions had been held, at a regular table, with regular chairs, and when both sides had finished signing, Vance and Jin shook hands across the table in the human way, which Jin had asked about the day before because she wanted to do it correctly. The treaty was not everything. It was not meant to be. It said that the silence was acknowledged and that the Council accepted formal responsibility for its inaction. It laid out the reparations, medical technology, agricultural systems, building materials, all of it specific and timed so it could not be delayed indefinitely. It created a new council seat, permanent and equal, for human representation. And it established a framework for the scientific exchange that Price and the council's researchers had already started on their own, which meant it mostly formalized something that was already happening. Lissaven had negotiated most of the details on the council side. Vance had negotiated most of them on the human side. The two of them had spent 10 days in a smaller room working through the language line by line, and by the end they had developed the particular kind of respect that comes from disagreeing with someone carefully and having them push back with equal care. The day after the signing, Graves walked the station's main corridor without a guard detail for the first time since they had arrived. He walked slowly, not because he was uncertain but because he wanted to see how the station worked, how the different species moved through the same space, where the quiet areas were, where people gathered. Other species still made way for him when they saw him coming. Some of them looked at the floor as he passed. But a few of them, a young Oran technician, an older Drenny researcher, a Solari Pact customs officer, looked up and nodded. Graves nodded back. He counted it as progress and kept walking. Price had accepted the joint research position. He told Vance about it that evening, sitting in the small common room on the inevitable dawn, in the slightly apologetic way he told people about things he was excited about. He said he had accepted on the condition that the first phase of any collaborative project would be led by Terran scientists. He said it had been accepted without argument. They were probably too surprised to argue, Vance said. "That is what I thought too," Price said. "I decided not to mention it." Vance smiled, not her public smile, the one she used in sessions when she needed to project calm. Her real one, brief and easy. Orith made one final move. 3 days after the treaty signing, he released a public statement, not through council channels, which he no longer had access to, but through Keth national media and the general broadcast networks. The statement said that humanity's return was not what it appeared to be. It said that the show of diplomacy was a cover for expansion, that the dark matter fleet was a tool of future conquest, and that the council had signed a treaty under duress with a species whose real intentions were plain to anyone willing to look. The statement spread. These things always do. Vance's response came 2 days later. It was not a long response. She recorded it herself, in a plain room, without anyone else in the frame. She did not address Orith by name. She did not use the words fear or threat or power. She spoke for about 3 minutes about humanity's 300 years of silence, not the council's inaction, but humanity's own experience of it. What it had been like to rebuild with no one watching. What it had meant to do that work and to know, at the end of it, that the galaxy was still there and that they were still part of it. She said that humanity had come back because this galaxy was home, and you do not conquer your home. You take care of it. She said that she hoped the species who heard Orith's statement would make up their own minds, look at the record that was now publicly available, and reach their own conclusions. Then she ended the recording and sent it out. The 43 dark matter warships did not leave. They moved, repositioned from the station's immediate proximity to a point further out, in the wide open space between Council territory and the nearest human system, but they stayed visible on long-range sensors, and they stayed there. The message in this was understood by everyone who needed to understand it: humanity was not going anywhere. The days of silence were over. Sarah Holt and Celoras had coffee together on the station's observation level on the last day before the human delegation prepared to return to the fleet. The observation level had wide windows that looked out at open space, a view that Holt had never stopped being quietly moved by, though she would not have admitted this easily. Celoras said that she hoped they would talk again. She said it carefully, the way people say things they are not sure will be welcomed. Holt said of course they would. She said it without hesitation, which was the only way it was worth saying. "Do you think it will be all right?" Celoras asked. She was not talking about the two of them. She was talking about all of it, the treaty, the fleet, the long slow work of two very different peoples trying to share the same galaxy after everything that had happened. Holt thought about it honestly. She thought about the population curves and the vote records and the plain meeting room and the moment Graves had nodded at a stranger in a corridor. "I think it will be difficult," she said. "But I also think we are good at difficult." That was not quite a full answer and both of them knew it. But it was an honest one, and sometimes an honest answer is the best one available. On the evening of the 34th day, Vance stood on the observation deck of the inevitable dawn. Behind her the ship was busy with the work of preparation, departure checks, coordination with the other vessels in the fleet, the 100 small tasks that come before a large movement. She let it happen around her and stood at the viewport. Her personal communication board had one new message. It had come through a private channel, not official, not diplomatic. Just a message. It was from Lissaven and it said, "I am glad humanity came back." Vance read it twice. Then she sat down, opened a reply, and wrote 3 words, "So are we." She sent it. Then she stood back up and went to join her crew. Outside the viewport, the fleet was holding its position, 43 black ships against the dark, patient and still. The stars around them were the same stars humanity had always known, the same ones they had watched from Earth before the collapse and from the surviving systems during the long silent years of rebuilding. They looked different now, or maybe humanity simply looked back at them differently than it used to. Vance went back to work. The fleet waited. The galaxy, large and complicated and full of species that were still figuring out what to do with the silence being over, turned slowly as it always had. And somewhere in a council archive that would now be updated rather than closed, a new entry was being written. Not the last chapter of something. The first page of something else.